She prepaid a year, but he said late. So what exactly did he actually check?
The lock was changed. That's the first thing I noticed. Not the silence in the hallway, not the way my grocery bags were cutting into my fingers, not even the fact that the light outside my apartment door had been replaced with a harsher, colder bulb. Just the lock. It was wrong. Different. New. And for a second, just a second, I thought maybe I was at the wrong door. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever had that moment where reality feels slightly off, like something's been moved half an inch to the left? I stepped closer. Same door number, same scratch near the handle from when I moved in, same faint scuff marks along the bottom. But the lock? Shiny, untouched, not mine. I slowly set the grocery bags down, pulled out my key, slid it in. It didn't fit. Not even close. That's when I heard his voice behind me. Calm, flat, almost rehearsed. I told you, late rent. I didn't turn around right away. Because the moment I heard that sentence, something didn't add up. Late? No. That word didn't belong to me. I turned slowly. Victor Hale, 52, owner of the building, standing there like he'd been waiting for this exact moment. Arms crossed, expression neutral, no hesitation. Like this was normal, like I was the problem. Late? I repeated, my voice quieter than I expected. He didn't blink. You've been notified. Not true. I paid a year up front. That part I said clearly, because I knew I was right. I remembered the transfer, the confirmation, the email, the lease terms. 12 months. Paid, locked in, no confusion. Victor tilted his head slightly, like I just said something mildly inconvenient. Not according to our system. Our system. I glanced back at the door. Everything I owned was on the other side of that lock. My laptop, my work files, my passport, my medication, all of it. And somehow, he was standing here, telling me I didn't belong anymore. Would you argue? Would you raise your voice? Demand answers? I didn't. I just stood there for a moment, letting the silence stretch. Because something else clicked. Not panic. Not fear. A pattern. Victor reached into a folder and handed me a paper. Non-payment notice, he said. You've got 48 hours. I took it. Didn't even look at it right away. Because I already knew before reading a single line that it was wrong. But here's the part that confused him. The part he didn't expect. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I didn't beg him to open the door. I just nodded once and said, okay, that's it. One word. And for the first time since I turned around, Victor hesitated. Just for a second, a flicker of something crossed his face. Confusion. Because people don't react like that when they're being locked out of their own home. People fight. People panic. People lose control. But I didn't. I picked up my grocery bags, stepped away from the door, and started walking down the hallway. Behind me, I heard him call out, "Make sure you clear your things, if you even can." I stopped, not turning around, not yet, because now I was sure. This wasn't a mistake. And if it wasn't a mistake, then it was something much worse. I shifted the bags in my hands and said calmly, "I won't need 48. Then I walked away. No raised voice. No scene. Just gone. And the entire time, one thought kept repeating in my head. He really didn't check. What would you do if everything you owned was suddenly locked behind a door you couldn't open? No warning that made sense, no explanation that matched reality, just a man telling you that you didn't belong there anymore. Would you panic? Or would you start thinking? Because as I stepped out of that building and into the cold night air, I wasn't panicking. Not yet. I set the grocery bags down on the sidewalk and finally looked at the paper Victor had handed me. Bold, official looking, intentionally intimidating. But within seconds, I saw it. The date was wrong. Not slightly off, completely wrong. The amount listed, also wrong. And the formatting didn't match the original documents I signed months ago. It looked real at a glance. But the longer you looked, the more it unraveled. That wasn't a mistake. That was constructed carefully enough to scare someone, not carefully enough to hold up. I exhaled slowly and pulled out my phone. Opened a folder I hadn't touched in weeks. Lease, receipts, transfers, everything was there. Every payment confirmation, every email, every timestamp, organized, backed up, duplicated. Because when I moved into that apartment a year ago, I made one decision. If I was going to commit to a place, I was going to do it right, which is why I paid a full year up front. And yeah, people question that. Isn't that risky? What if something goes wrong? I remember laughing it off at the time, because back then it felt simple, clean, secure. No monthly stress, no late fees, no surprises. Or at least, that's what I thought. I tapped on the bank transfer receipt. The amount matched perfectly. The date? Locked. The confirmation code? Verified. And most importantly, it didn't go through Victor. It went through the previous owner. That detail sat quietly in my mind. Not urgent yet, but important, very important. I locked my phone and picked up my bags again. Still calm. Still steady. Because here's the thing no one tells you about moments like this. The loud reaction, the emotional explosion, that's exactly what people like Victor expect. That's what they rely on. Confusion, fear, desperation, mistakes. But if you don't give them that, if you slow everything down instead, you start seeing things differently. I walked a few blocks before stopping under a streetlight, pulled out my phone again, scrolled not through panic, but through memory. Emails from months ago, messages about system updates, requests to reconfirm payment details. At the time, they felt annoying. Now, they felt connected, like pieces of something I hadn't fully looked at yet. And then I remembered something specific. A message Victor sent not long after he bought the building. Short, casual, easy to ignore. Please ensure all tenants update their payment profiles in the new system. At the time, but I never sent money through it because I didn't need to. I had already paid, so why? Why would I be listed as unpaid? Unless I stopped walking, that thought didn't finish itself. Not yet, but it lingered, sharp, uncomfortable, because if that system didn't reflect my payment, then what exactly was it tracking? And more importantly, who else was in the same position? I glanced back down the street, toward the building I had just left. My apartment was still there. My things were still inside. But suddenly, that wasn't the most important problem anymore. Something bigger was forming. Something that didn't start tonight. Something that had been building quietly for months. And Victor? He had just made one very specific move. One that forced everything into the open. I adjusted my grip on the grocery bags and kept walking. No rush. No panic. Just clarity. Because now I knew this wasn't about getting back into my apartment. Not yet. This was about understanding what he missed. And why that mistake was about to cost him everything. Why would anyone pay a year of rent up front? That's the question I kept getting, long before any of this happened. And honestly, at the time, it felt like the smartest decision I'd made. 12 months earlier, everything was different. New city, new job, new start. I had just landed a fully remote position in data compliance, which basically meant one thing. I dealt with details, records, systems, patterns, things most people overlooked. Things I didn't. Stability mattered to me. Predictability mattered even more. So when I found that apartment, quiet building, decent neighborhood, reasonable rent, I didn't hesitate. The landlord back then, Elliot Grayson, 61, was straightforward. No pressure, no weird clauses, no hidden terms. Just one option he offered casually. If you want, you can pay ahead. Locks in your rate. Simple. Clean. I reviewed the lease 3 times anyway. Every line, every condition. and there it was clearly written. Full prepayment accepted. Lease protected for 12 months. No additional charges or rent adjustments during that period. Legally solid. So I did it. Transferred the full amount directly through the bank. No cash, no third-party apps. Traceable, time-stamped, verified. And just like that, the entire year was handled. No monthly stress, no reminders, no risk of being late. At least, that's what I believed. For the first 3 months, everything was exactly as expected. Quiet, routine, normal, until the building was sold. That's when Victor Hale entered the picture. And things started shifting subtly at first. Then, not so subtly. He introduced himself through an email. Short, formal, slightly impersonal. New ownership, updated procedures, improved systems. Standard language. Nothing alarming, but then came the follow-up messages. Please register in the new tenant payment portal. Confirm your rent status. Ensure all records are up to date. At first, it just felt redundant. I had already paid, so technically, none of this applied to me. But I still followed the instructions, created an account, entered my details, uploaded my lease, because ignoring systems, that creates problems. And I didn't do problems. That's when I noticed the first inconsistency. The portal showed a balance, not zero, not prepaid. A balance. I remember staring at the screen for a few seconds, thinking, that's not right. So I sent a message, attached my payment confirmation, kept it simple. Hi, I've already paid my lease in full, attaching records for reference. No emotion, no accusation, just facts. Hours passed, then a day, then 2, no response. At the time, I brushed it off. System error, glitch. Someone would fix it eventually. But then something else happened. A neighbor, Lena, 34, mentioned something in passing while we were both checking mail. Did he ask you to confirm your payments again? I nodded. She frowned. I already paid this month, and it still says I didn't. That was the first moment something felt shared, not isolated, not random, connected. Over the next few weeks, small conversations started stacking up. Nothing dramatic, just little comments. Confusion, frustration, questions with no answers, and always the same pattern. The system didn't match reality. Meanwhile, Victor, he stayed distant, hard to reach. But when he did respond, it was always the same tone. Controlled, certain, like the system couldn't be wrong, which meant the tenants had to be. I didn't push, didn't escalate, but I did start doing something else. Documenting everything. Screenshots of the portal, copies of emails, time-stamped records of every interaction. Because inconsistencies don't disappear on their own. They build, quietly, until they become something you can't ignore. And then, about 2 weeks before the lock change, I got an email, subject line, reminder, rent overdue. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was confused, but because now it was no longer subtle. This wasn't a glitch anymore. This was being reinforced, repeated, pushed. I replied immediately, attached everything again. Clear, direct. This is incorrect. My lease was paid in full. Please confirm receipt. And this time, Victor did see it. I know he did. Because I got a read receipt. Time-stamped. Opened. Acknowledged. And then, nothing. No reply. No correction. No explanation. Just silence. The kind of silence that isn't accidental. The kind that waits. Builds. Prepares. And now, standing outside my locked apartment, that silence finally made sense. Because it wasn't neglect. It was strategy. And whatever Victor was doing, he had just taken it one step further. 3 days after the lockout, I still hadn't called him back. Not once. No missed calls returned, no angry messages, no demands to be let back in. And that was the part Victor didn't understand. Because from his perspective, I should have been spiraling. I should have been banging on his office door, threatening legal action, begging for access to my own apartment. But instead, I checked into a hotel. Nothing fancy, just clean, quiet, temporary. I bought a charger, a change of clothes, a toothbrush, everything I needed to function without stepping foot back in that building. And then I got to work. Not emotional work, not reactive work, strategic work. Because by that point, I wasn't trying to get back inside anymore. I was trying to understand the system he built. And more importantly, where it broke. First call I made? My bank. I walked them through everything. The full upfront payment, the landlord change, the discrepancies. They didn't hesitate. Your transfer is fully verified, the representative told me. There's no reversal, no dispute, no irregularity on our end. Exactly what I expected. But I needed it documented. Officially. Second call, the local tenant protection office. And here's where things shifted. Because the moment I described what happened, prepaid lease. System showing non-payment. Lock change without court order. The tone on the other end changed immediately. Wait, the woman said, he locked you out already? Yes. A pause. Then, that's illegal. Not complicated, not unclear, just illegal. She asked me to send everything. Lease, bank records, emails, not summaries, proof. And I had all of it. Organized, time-stamped, clean. Within an hour, everything was submitted. Within 2, I got a follow-up. And that's when the word came up for the first time. Pattern. You're not the only one reporting this, she said. That landed differently. Because up until that moment, I suspected something bigger. Now, it was confirmed. This wasn't just about me. Third call, a legal advisor. Short consultation, straight to the point. I laid it out. He listened. Didn't interrupt. And when I finished, he asked one question. Did you pay the current landlord directly? No. Silence. Then a quiet, almost amused exhale. Okay, that's important. There it was again. That detail, the one sitting quietly in the background since the beginning. The payment didn't go through Victor. It went through the previous owner. At the time, it felt irrelevant. Now, it felt like the center of everything. Do you have full documentation of the transfer? He asked. Yes. Good, he said, because if what you're describing is accurate, he created a separate accounting system. I leaned back slightly. A what? A shadow ledger, he clarified. One that doesn't reflect actual payments. That word stuck? Shadow. Because that's exactly what it felt like. Something running alongside reality, but not matching it. And suddenly, everything clicked into place. The portal discrepancies. The repeated confirmations. The ignored emails. He wasn't fixing errors. He was reinforcing a narrative. One where tenants looked like they hadn't paid. Even when they had, especially when they had, because prepaid tenants, we were the easiest to manipulate on paper. No monthly transactions. No recent receipts. Just one payment, buried months in the past. Easy to disconnect. Easy to rewrite. Unless someone kept everything, which I did. Don't contact him, the advisor added. Let this move through official channels. I didn't argue, because I never planned to call Victor anyway. By the end of that day, everything was in motion. Complaints filed. Documents submitted. Records cross-checked. And Victor? Still waiting for a reaction he was never going to get. Then, on the third day, something happened. Not to me. To him, a letter. Delivered directly. Stamped. Official. And not from a tenant. Not from a lawyer I hired. But from something much bigger. He opened it expecting control. Instead, he got a notice. And whatever was written inside changed everything. He opened the envelope and everything shifted. I wasn't there to see it in person, but I didn't need to be, because by the time it reached me through calls, updates, and a very specific tone in people's voices, I could picture it perfectly. Victor Hale standing in his office, still convinced he was in control, still expecting this to be small, manageable, fixable. He slices the envelope open, pulls out the document, and then that pause, that subtle change in posture. Because right at the top, in bold, unmistakable print, not a complaint, an investigation. And suddenly, this wasn't about one tenant anymore. It was about the entire building. The notice outlined everything in precise clinical language. Illegal lockout without court authorization. Misrepresentation of tenant payment records. Potential financial misconduct under property management law. Each line heavier than the last. Each one backed by documentation. By the time he reached the second page, Victor already knew. This wasn't something he could dismiss. And within 24 hours, they showed up. Inspectors. 2 of them, unannounced. Professional, direct, uninterested in excuses. They didn't ask broad questions. They asked specific ones. Provide full payment records for all tenants. Explain discrepancies between tenant-submitted proof and internal system data. Clarify authority under which locks were changed. No room to improvise. No room to deflect. And here's where things started unraveling. Because Victor had records. Plenty of them. But they didn't match. Not with bank confirmations. Not with lease agreements. Not even with each other. That system he trusted, the one he kept referring to, it wasn't holding up. Meanwhile, the building itself started changing. Quiet at first, then louder. Tenants talking in hallways. Doors left open longer than usual. Conversations that used to be whispers, now out in the open. Did you get that notice too? He said, I missed last month. I paid in cash, no receipt. Piece by piece, the pattern surfaced. And once people started comparing notes, it spread fast. Victor felt it. Loss of control isn't loud at first. It's subtle. It's the shift in how people look at you. How they stop avoiding eye contact and start holding it. And then my phone rang. Victor. For the first time since the lock change. I let it ring. Voicemail. Then another call. Voicemail again. Then a message. Maya, we need to resolve this. There's been a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding. 3 days ago, I was late. Now it was a misunderstanding. Interesting. Another voicemail followed, more urgent this time. We can fix this. I can have your apartment open today. Too late. Because at that point, this wasn't about access anymore. It was about exposure. Hours later, another message. Different tone, carefully measured. If necessary, we can discuss compensation. There it was. The shift from authority to negotiation. But I didn't respond. Not once. Because everything I needed to say was already being handled somewhere else through people who didn't rely on tone or pressure or intimidation. Just facts. And facts were starting to stack up fast. By the end of the second inspection, one detail stood out above everything else. Buried in the preliminary findings, a single line that changed the scale of the situation completely. Financial discrepancies linked to owner-controlled accounts. Not clerical errors. Not miscommunication. Not system glitches. Owner-controlled. Intentional. Traceable. And suddenly, this wasn't just about tenants being pushed out. This was about money. Where it went. Where it didn't. And why. Victor thought he was managing a building. But what he actually built was something that could be audited, broken down, exposed. And now, it was the same system he used to justify locking me out was about to be used against him. And the one detail he overlooked, the one he never verified, that's what connected everything. That's what turned a single lock change into something much bigger than he ever planned for. The one detail he didn't check was the only one that mattered. By the time the investigation moved from preliminary review to full audit, the story Victor had been relying on started collapsing fast. Not dramatically, not all at once, but piece by piece, line by line, record by record. Because here's what actually happened. Victor Hale didn't just make a mistake. He built a system, a deliberate one. When he purchased the building, he inherited tenants with locked-in leases. Some of them, like mine, prepaid months in advance at lower rates. That limited his profit. And instead of waiting those leases out, he tried to bypass them. The method was simple in theory, complicated in execution, and ultimately flawed. He introduced a new internal payment system, the tenant portal. On the surface, it looked legitimate. Tenants registered, uploaded information, checked balances. But behind that interface, there was a second layer. A separate internal ledger controlled only by him. That ledger didn't reflect actual payments. It reflected what he wanted the records to show. Tenants who paid monthly, easier to manipulate slowly. A missed entry here, a delayed update there. But tenants who prepaid like me, we were different. Our payments were large, singular, and most importantly, disconnected from his system entirely. Because we didn't pay him. We paid the previous owner, and that's the detail he didn't fully account for. He assumed distance would create doubt. That time would blur records. That tenants wouldn't have immediate proof. So he marked those accounts as unpaid. Started sending reminders. Then warnings. Then notices. Building a paper trail that suggested non-compliance. So when he finally escalated to lockouts and evictions, on paper, it looked justified. At least, that was the plan. But it failed for one reason. Traceability. Every payment I made wasn't just recorded. It was anchored, bank verified, time-stamped, legally tied to the lease agreement he inherited when he bought the building. He didn't just ignore my payment. He ignored the legal continuity of that payment. And once the housing authority connected those dots, everything else unraveled. They pulled financial records, compared tenant submissions against his internal data, and the discrepancies, they weren't small. They were systemic. Patterns emerged across multiple units. Payments received but not recorded. Tenants marked delinquent despite proof. Eviction processes initiated without legal standing. And then came the part Victor couldn't contain. The accounts. Because that missing rent, it didn't just disappear. It redirected into accounts under his control. Not building accounts. Not escrow. Personal, that's when it stopped being a housing violation and became something else entirely. Financial misconduct. Possibly fraud. From that point forward, everything accelerated. Victor wasn't sending notices anymore. He was receiving them. Legal demands. Financial audits. Formal charges under review. The building itself shifted overnight. Tenants who had been quiet started speaking. Comparing records. Filing complaints. Some realized they had overpaid. Others realized they were never late to begin with. And suddenly, the narrative flipped. Victor wasn't the authority anymore. He was the subject. Emotional payoff. The moment it fully landed for me wasn't dramatic. No shouting. No confrontation. Just a phone call. Short. Direct. This is to confirm your lease remains valid and fully paid. I sat there in the hotel room, phone still in my hand, and for the first time since that night outside my door, I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Not relief from fear, but release from tension, because I was never uncertain about the truth, just about how long it would take for it to matter. Victor thought I'd panic, that I'd react, that I'd make this easy. But staying calm, that's what changed everything. Consequence payoff. Victor Hale's situation didn't resolve quietly. It couldn't. For the other tenants, the impact was immediate. Locked out residents were reinstated. Incorrect balances were wiped. Some received refunds. Others received lease extensions. And maybe most importantly, they stopped second-guessing themselves, because that's what his system relied on. Doubt, confusion, isolation. Once that disappeared, so did his leverage. Final resolution moment. A week later, I stood in front of my apartment again. Same hallway, same door, but this time, the lock was different. Again. Installed legally, documented, verified. A representative from the housing authority handed me the key. No tension, no confrontation, just procedure. I unlocked the door, stepped inside. Everything was exactly where I left it. Groceries obviously were gone, but everything else, untouched. Still, like time had paused. I set my bag down on the counter and looked around. Same space, different weight. Because now, it wasn't just an apartment. It was proof. That one decision to keep records, to stay calm, to not react impulsively, had turned something small into something undeniable. My phone buzzed. News alert. A short headline. Property owner under investigation for tenant fraud scheme. I glanced at it, then locked the screen. No reaction. No satisfaction. Just closure. I placed the keys on the table and walked further inside. And as the door closed behind me, one thought settled in, clear and final. He changed the lock, but he unlocked everything else.
So, mistake or setup? And what detail would you have checked before walking away?